Death is coming for our family.
Final Destination Bloodlines is late to the party. Its predecessor, Final Destination 5, was released 14 years ago, a veritable eon in film-going terms, especially when you consider it was shot and released in 3D. Body count horror still has its audience, but it hasn't been the genre's bread and butter in a very long time. It must also be said that Bloodlines isn't even 2025's first horror movie about the disembodied specter of death creating cartoonishly brutal tableau of murder. Osgood Perkins the Monkey both excelled in and elevated that space. But as it turns out, Bloodlines is only late to the party because it was stopping at the store to pick up beer and fireworks, and boy did it come ready to irresponsibly mix those two things. From the moment it kicks the door down with its stellar opening sequence, the newest addition to the Final Destination family maintains a laser focus on making sure everyone goes home with good stories to tell. There's a real sense of homecoming in Bloodline's extended 1960s set intro, which follows lovebirds Iris and Paul on the way to the top of the Skyview, basically the Space Needle, for a night out. Fate pulls Iris's attention to seemingly disconnected images throughout the evening. An overcrowded elevator, a creepy problem child in a bow tie, a cook working with an open flame, a glass dance floor suspended hundreds of feet in the air. Co-directors Adam Stein and Zach Lipovsky use Iris's growing paranoia to set the stage for disaster right out in the open. Each domino they line up is highlighted with such tongue-in-cheek attention that by the time the band's playing the Isley Brothers shout and all those dominoes start to fall, it is clear that Bloodlines is going to be leaning into comedy harder than any Final Destination before it. It's a tonal shift that pays off spectacularly, with clear reverence not just for the death traps at the franchise's heart, but for the way the component parts of those traps fit together and build off each other in increasingly ridiculous ways. Death's scythe never falls quite the way you expect it to in Bloodlines, with pieces of the killer puzzles coming into play in consistently surprising ways. It's a shell game that Bloodlines plays not just with its causes of death, but with who's actually the target of any given trap, and these carefully constructed moments rarely miss. By the end of the prologue, Stein and Lipovsky have treated us to an entire movie's worth of over-the-top kills, and we haven't even met our lead character yet. The directors are singing from the Sam Raimi hymn book, with a kinetic style that succeeds on both the comedy and horror fronts, and that comes across clearly in the cinematography and editing. Special mention also has to go to the effects here, which blend practical and CG elements extremely well as bodies are slashed, smashed, smushed, and stuffed. Some of these sequences feel a little less effective than the others. One at a tattoo parlor comes to mind, but even that one sets up a pretty hilarious joke for the next scene. As if acknowledging that we're all running on borrowed time, horrifying accidental deaths or no, Bloodlines wastes only a few of the precious 110 minutes we spend with it. The tragedy at the Skyview spins out into the present day, as college student Steph Lewis is plagued with visions of the event so disruptive she's been placed on academic probation. Final Destination movies have always been built around premonitions of tragedies which have yet to occur. By shaking up the formula with Steph investigating her relationship to a tragedy that happened before she was born, Bloodlines gets off to a pretty intriguing start. That intrigue doesn't last long, though. The movie rushes to reveal why Steph is having these visions and how the Skyview tragedy connects to deaths happening in the present day. Steph's friends and family, who make up the majority of the supporting cast, aren't the types to slow down for serious and broody monologues about mortality. They're a little less complicated than that, a little stupid. Lots of these characters are dumber than a box of rocks, but here, that feels appropriate, given they need to be just oblivious enough to not see the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. Steph's extended family are like the Avengers of teen horror movie archetypes, and they know it. They're in close conversation with the audience's knowledge of not just the horror genre, but of the established rules of Final Destination. By comparison, Steph's growing ability to see the code of this murder matrix sets up some great moments, but outside of that, the characterization is rather thin for Steph. Caitlin Santawana does deserve credit, though, for keeping Bloodlines emotionally grounded, even in the face of a superfluous subplot about Steph's estranged mom that kicks off a little too late to have any real impact.
I saved a lot of lives that night.
Everyone needs to get off the dance floor!
Lives that were never meant to be saved. But Death doesn't like it when you mess with his plans.
Bloodlines very wisely positions itself as an entry point for newcomers, which makes a lot of sense given how sparsely connected the first 5 Final Destination films are. But the movie does take care to give love to some of the franchise's most memorable imagery. References that are obvious but unobtrusive to enjoying Bloodlines on its own terms. A little more effort is exerted to make space for the late Tony Todd's swan song as the ominous Bloodworth. The horror icon usually stops by Final Destination movies to muse on the nature of death, but here in Bloodlines, that moment takes on powerful symbolism. Todd's scene was clearly devised with the intention of giving him a chance to bid farewell to his most ardent fans. The gravity that he is famous for hits like a freight train here, helped enormously by some wonderful camera work that often frames Todd as if he's talking directly to the audience.
Let the guy finish.
And to truly break the cycle, you have to die.
In Final Destination Bloodlines, death is the life of the party. There's little novelty to the boilerplate family trauma plot of this 6th Final Destination movie, but what its comedy-forward take on the franchise's established formula lacks in thematic depth, it more than makes up for with delightful, well-designed kills and boundless gallows humor. A testament to the powerful, simple joy of a well-executed setup and payoff, Bloodline's lethal Rube Goldberg machines are tactile and satisfying, benefiting from a solid blend of goopy practical and visual effects. It's a fantastic jumping-on point for new fans, but the Final Destination faithful are well taken care of, with cheeky references to previous movies and a truly poignant farewell from one of the horror genre's late kings, Tony Todd.
It all started with Grandma. Death is coming for us because we were never supposed to exist. Watch out!
Hey everybody, Clint Gage, executive producer for Entertainment Video here at IGN, and I needed to join in on some of this goopy Final Destination fun with you, Tom.
The more the merrier.
This was a fun movie. Yeah?
I had a blast with this movie. It is one of those old-fashioned horror movies. I very much had the feeling walking out that they don't make them like this anymore. It is so charmingly aware of itself. It really understands its place in the pantheon of horror movies, both in relation to Final Destination as a franchise and of horror movies, horror comedies. It's very smart and very silly and very stupid all at once.
I am interested in something that you said earlier about this movie leaning more into the comedy aspect of the premise, right? But in terms of what flavor of horror is sort of most to your liking, like where does funny horror comedy land for you?
Horror comedy is probably my favorite horror subgenre. It's incredibly important to me, always has been. Shaun of the Dead, my favorite movie ever. I remember seeing the trailer for that movie on the DVD for 28 days later, and I think that connection actually is very important to my appreciation for horror comedy. It was at a time when I was deciding what kind of stuff I liked, and watching 28 Days Later, to this day, one of the best zombie movies ever made, one of the most intense zombie movies ever made, and to, before that movie started, have a trailer for a movie that was a total piss take of a serious zombie movie, Shaun of the Dead, and it looked incredibly funny. And of course, when I then saw the movie, months later, I was blown away by it like everybody else was. And I was like, 13 when that movie came out? I was right in the crosshairs for kids that loved horror and loved laughing. Yeah. Custom made for me. And that's only borne out over the 20 years that it followed. It's still my favorite movie.
And you also, in the review, I thought it was interesting, you invoked Sam Raimi a little bit too. Is there like an Evil Dead kind of vibe specifically in this movie, or is it more just with the energy of the camera and the pace of the edit and that sort of thing that Raimi is known for?
I would say the Raimi movie, interestingly enough, the Raimi movie that this is most feeling in spirit of is Drag Me to Hell, where the disembodied evil is so... it's omnipresent, and it feels almost like a character that is standing just off to the side. Characters speak to death in a way that they haven't really before in these movies.
Almost like the villain of the movie is directing the movie.
Yes.
Like just behind camera being like, no.
So yeah, this movie does share a lot of sort of the spirit and energy of Drag Me to Hell, but it does also, death as a disembodied force. Obviously, we know that as sort of a hallmark of the Evil Dead franchise, and it does have that going for it. It sort of evokes this sense of self-awareness, this sense that they know what they're doing. They know that they're setting up this really, really silly series of events that is going to end with somebody getting, bisected by an elevator or some crazy stuff like that.
Well, let me ask you this, Bet, in terms of Final Destination Bloodlines as a member of that franchise, what did this movie do for your appreciation of Final Destination as a franchise overall?
I think it kind of recontextualized the franchise for me. I think the way that it sort of looks back on the previous films and has a ton of respect for what came before. It's not making fun of itself. It's celebrating the parts of the franchise that have gone on to become the things that I think most people think of when they think of Final Destination. Over-the-top kills, the specter of death being this sort of strange participant in the action. Tony Todd, obviously, like having a place here because that's what has come before. Like it picks and chooses its moments to relate back to those previous films and connect to what's come before. But mostly what it does is do a really good job of understanding how most of the audience probably is coming to it and meeting it on those terms. And I thought it does such a great job of that.
With a franchise like this in particular, like you have to do that. I mean, especially, this is we have a whole new word for this kind of movie. It's a legasequel.
Yeah. Saw X does a very similar thing as well, working in that same space.
And learning the right lessons from the whole reason that we're making a legasequel to this thing in the first place. Like learning the right lessons about what people loved about the franchise to begin with and only doing that and sort of doubling down on that. But I mean, that's the thing with these legasequels. We're bound to get one eventually. Like if there was a franchise that was popular, like we're gonna get another one of those movies. It's just kind of a fact of life these days. But this one seemed like it works for you. Like what did you think that it did right that other legasequels might learn from? Because you've also you've also reviewed a handful of these, and just recently, within the last year, you reviewed Gladiator 2, which was the same thing, and then Alien Romulus had a lot of that energy going too. So.
Well, you know what? If memory serves, I think I also gave both of those movies 8s. If off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure I'm right about that.
You're a Legasequel guy.
Legasequel fanboy, I guess. No, well, I think the thing that all three of those movies share when I kind of stack them next to each other is an awareness of where those movies have come to sit in pop culture and sort of a celebration of that. I think we're in serious times. It feels like a serious time. And you know what? The way that these movies kind of are taking themselves a little less seriously than maybe a Prometheus did in following on that franchise, or, Gladiator didn't get its sequel until now, but I think it's a great thing that all these movies, we went through such a period where like grimdark and getting more serious, like that was the way.
The gritty reboot of The Dark Knight and, or Batman Begins and Casino Royale were just right there on the cutting edge of like, no, real grounded.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to see the way that film sort of reacts to those sort of larger movements. And what we see right now with those three movies as just sort of the microcosm is like, there is space to bring these properties back in a way that feels fun and fresh, but that also honors kind of what came before it.
But, kind of the other side of that coin though, like how hard do you try to review a movie like this out of context from the rest of the franchise? Or do you think you can do that, or should you even do that?
I think my golden rule when I'm reviewing anything, golden rule is kind of meeting the thing where it's at and how well does it achieve what it's trying to do. That's where I start with everything. And when I look at Final Destination
it's not like
Bloodlines,
you can review an apple based on how good an orange it's supposed to be.
Exactly. And so I do try to take everything as its own thing. And that's very, very hard to do with a Marvel movie because you can't review Captain America Brave New World without taking into account the 35 prequels that it has. Like, there's a weird amount of balancing act that you have to do. For Final Destination, though, it's pretty easy to sort of take it on its own terms because it is pitching itself as a sort of soft reboot. It is not a reboot at all. Like, it is very much in continuity with the previous films, and it doesn't shy away from that. but it's a question of emphasis. And what it emphasizes is the sort of new version of, it's the new tricks that this old dog has learned, basically.
Thanks for talking more about that, Tom, though. That was fun.
Thank you so much for watching. For more movie reviews, check out what we thought of Sinners and Thunderbolts, or whatever they're calling that movie these days. And as always, keep it right here on IGN.